Welcome to today's deep dive. I mean, right now, probably across the globe, there are millions of people pouring a glass of wine or, cracking open a beer just to take the edge off a high-pressure day.
Oh, absolutely. It's an
Okay.
incredibly common thing.
Yeah, it's deeply ingrained, right? When the pressure mounts and that internal alarm starts blaring, a drink just feels like the fastest, most effective way to reach over and just turn the volume knob of that distress down to zero.
Right. Stress pushes and alcohol pulls.
Exactly. But today, we are going on a mission to uncover the actual biological reality of why we reach for that drink, and more importantly, how alcohol physically rewires your brain's ability to cope with life's curveballs.
And the science on this is just fascinating.
It really is. Our guide for this journey is an April 2026 article from Psychology Today written by Dr. William A. Haseltine. It's titled From Coping to Compulsion. And in it, he breaks down this groundbreaking study that was recently published in the journal eLife. And I have to say, it completely flips the script on everything we assume about, drinking to calm down.
It really does. Because the framing we rely on every day, this cultural idea of alcohol is just this convenient, harmless shortcut out of distress, it turns out to be fundamentally flawed.
Wait, really? So it's not just a harmless way to unwind?
Not at all. I mean, alcohol isn't simply a pause button for an overactive nervous system. When we actually look under the hood at the cellular level, we find that alcohol is actively paralyzing the exact biological systems you need to flexibly respond to tomorrow's stress.
Wow. Paralyzing them.
Yeah, it doesn't just numb the feeling. It physically dismantles your behavioral flexibility.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if alcohol isn't just taking the edge off, but it's actually breaking our internal machinery, we really need a clear picture of how that machinery is supposed to work in the first place, right?
Absolutely. You have to know what's broken to understand the damage.
Right. So before we look at the damage alcohol does, we have to understand the brain's initial response to stress. And according to the research in the article, this begins with an early warning system deep in the brain called the extended amygdala.
Yeah, the extended amygdala is this incredibly fascinating structure, largely because it handles different temporal phases of threat.
Different temporal phases, like time-based.
Exactly. So it's made up of two main regions. First, you have the central amygdala, which most people are pretty familiar with.
Right, the classic lizard brain fear center.
Exactly. That's your acute motion sensor. It handles immediate, clear, and present danger, like a car swerving into your lane on the highway.
The instant panic feeling.
Yes. But the extended amygdala also includes this other region called the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis.
Wow. Okay, that is a mouthful.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Researchers usually just call it the BNST, but that region acts much more like a continuous threat radar.
So less car swerving and more what?
More like lingering generalized apprehension. So the ongoing worry about a potential layoff or, a looming deadline that's 2 weeks away.
Oh, I know that feeling well.
Right, we all do. And both of these regions are constantly scanning your environment. They're assessing emotional upheaval, trying to determine if you are actually safe. And when they do detect a threat, whether it's immediate or chronic, they release a very highly specific stress messenger.
And that's a chemical, right?
Yeah, it's a peptide called corticotropin releasing factor, or CRF for short.
Okay, CRF. And CRF is that chemical trigger that gets your heart racing and, your palms sweating. It's deeply linked to that physical sensation of anxiety we all get.
Exactly. And as we'll see, it's also deeply tied to addiction.
Right. So if we visualize this extended amygdala, we can think of it kind of like the navigation system in a highly automated car. The system is scanning the road ahead, and when it spots a major traffic jam or a hazard, it doesn't just flash a tiny warning light on the dashboard.
No, it has to get your attention.
Right. It floods the car's internal computer with an urgent alert signal.
Yeah.
Which is the CRF, basically screaming, hazard detected, manual override required.
I love that. That is an incredibly useful way to frame it.
Oh, wow.
Especially because it highlights where the scientific community has, quite frankly, gotten this completely wrong historically.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, for decades, psychology and neuroscience viewed that CRF signal, that stress alert, purely as a source of discomfort.
Like it was just a bug in the system.
Exactly. We classified stress as this net negative biological state.
Yeah.
Just a glitch or an unpleasant byproduct of life that we needed to eradicate.
Just make the feeling stop.
Right. But the human brain is so much more elegant than that. It doesn't expend all this energy creating distress just to make you miserable. That chemical alert, the CRF, it has a very specific functional destination. It's actually driving toward a biological purpose.
Which is where this iLife study completely changes the map, right? Because building directly on that idea of the CRF alert signal, the researchers have finally tracked exactly where that stress messenger travels next.
Yes, and that was the big missing piece.
Right, because it doesn't just sit in the emotional center, making us feel awful. It travels directly into the dorsal striatum, which, as the article points out, is the brain's habit center.
Exactly. The dorsal striatum is a critical part of the basal ganglia, which is the region that runs your automatic behaviors.
Our autopilot.
You got it. We spend an enormous amount of our daily lives relying on this system. I mean, it controls everything from driving your usual route to work without actively thinking about the turns.
Or like reaching for your phone the second you wake up.
Yes, exactly. Or pouring that drink right after a hard shift. And deep inside this habit center lies a very sparse but just incredibly powerful population of cells. They're called cholinergic interneurons.
Cholinergic interneurons.
Right, and they make up a tiny, tiny fraction of the cells there, but they hold immense influence over the whole system.
And so these cholinergic interneurons, they essentially act as the actual manual override switch in our car analogy.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Because at any given moment, they dictate whether your brain is going to stay on autopilot, executing those, deeply ingrained routines, or if it's going to shift gears into deliberate, conscious, goal-directed decision-making.
Exactly. And when we look at this reality down at the level of individual neurons, the architecture is quite stunning. This recent animal study proved there is a direct, hardwired connection between the fear center and the habit center.
They're literally wired together.
Yes. When the extended amygdala senses stress and releases the CRF signal, that chemical message travels straight into the dorsal striatum and binds to receptors right on those cholinergic interneurons.
Okay, and what happens when it binds?
This activation causes them to release acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine.
Right, which is a neurotransmitter that essentially acts as the biological lubricant for flexible behavior.
Okay, wait, I really want to pause on this. So you're saying stress isn't just a purely negative feeling that we need to, medicate or numb away. What you're saying is that stress is actually a biological tool.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Like, it's literally designed to pause our automatic pilot so we can change course and make deliberate decisions. Because, we are so conditioned to think, I am stressed, therefore I am malfunctioning. But the science is showing that the stress is the function.
What's fascinating here is how this shifts our entire paradigm of anxiety. Because stress and habit are not isolated islands in the brain. They are physically and chemically wired together for our survival.
Wow, so they depend on each other.
Completely. Think about it this way. If you were walking through the woods on autopilot, just totally lost in thought, and you hear a predator growl, that surge of stress is not a malfunction.
It's trying to save your life.
Yes, it is the exact mechanism that floods your habit center with acetylcholine. It instantly pauses your walking casually routine so you can actually assess the situation and choose to hide or run or freeze.
So the stress revs you up, and sure, it feels incredibly uncomfortable, but biologically, it is the cue that enables you to pivot when your environment suddenly changes.
Precisely. It grants you the flexibility to survive.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because now we have to introduce the antagonist of our story. What happens when a person regularly uses alcohol to cope and introduces it into this beautifully wired, elegant circuit?
And that is exactly what the eLife researchers wanted to find out.
Right. They actually looked at rodent brain tissue exposed to alcohol, and they were specifically observing the cellular activity during early withdrawal, which, from what I understand, is the critical window when human cravings peak and when relapse is just incredibly likely.
That's right. And the methodology of the study is really what makes it so revealing. They didn't just observe the rodent's outward behavior.
They went much deeper.
Much deeper. They used advanced electrophysiology to record the actual electrical spikes of those cholinergic interneurons in the brain slices during early withdrawal.
So they were watching the sparks fly, basically.
Basically, yeah. They mapped the synaptic currents to see how these exact cells reacted when they were hit with that CRF stress signal. And what they discovered is that alcohol fundamentally alters the excitability thresholds of these critical switches.
Okay, wait, let me clarify the sequence here. So the stressful event happens, right? The extended amygdala's radar detects the threat. Does the CRF signal still get sent out? Like, does the alarm still ring?
Yes. The extended amygdala still operates perfectly. It senses the stress, the CRF message is dispatched, and it arrives fully intact at the habit center.
Okay, so returning to our navigation system analogy. The hazard is detected on the road, the internal computer screams, manual override required, and it sends the electrical signal right to the steering wheel so you can swerve. But what you're saying is what alcohol has done during this withdrawal phase is effectively rust the manual override switch shut.
It is exactly what happens.
The warning lights are flashing, the alert signal arrives, but because the interneurons' excitability has been dampened, they just resist the signal. They fail to fire.
They literally can't get over the threshold.
Right, so that vital surge of acetylcholine, the lubricant that allows you to turn the wheel and make a flexible choice, it just never happens.
The physical mechanism of the cells has been compromised. The alcohol exposure changes the potassium channels and the general electrical resistance of the cell membrane itself.
So it's a physical change in the hardware.
Yes, so when the stress signal hits, it simply cannot push the interneuron past the threshold to fire. The brain is robbed of its ability to use stress as a cue to change behavior. You feel the immense pressure of the stress, the alarm is deafening, but you literally cannot pause and recalculate. You are trapped on autopilot.
Man, that is terrifying. And if your dominant autopilot routine, your most ingrained habit is drinking to cope with stress, you can immediately see the vicious loop this creates.
It feeds right into itself.
Yeah, the stress hits, which is biologically supposed to trigger behavioral flexibility. But because the alcohol has rusted the flexibility switch shut, you just default to your strongest habit, which is the drink.
And that drink then further dampens the excitability of those interneurons for the very next time.
So you are heading toward a wall, the warning lights are glaring, but the steering wheel is just locked dead center.
And this locked steering wheel, it fundamentally reframes our entire understanding of addiction.
Because it's not just about chasing a high anymore.
Exactly. For decades, the clinical and cultural narrative around alcohol use disorder has been overwhelmingly focused on the reward system. We talk constantly about dopamine, about chasing the high and craving the pleasure.
Right, that's what everyone thinks addiction is.
And while reward is definitely a factor, this research forces the scientific community to look at the other side of the coin. Addiction isn't merely an overactive reward circuit. We have to start viewing it as a profound disorder of behavioral flexibility and choice under pressure.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if you are listening right now and you or someone you know is trying to break a deeply ingrained harmful habit, understanding this underlying neuroscience is vital because it removes the moral judgment from the equation entirely.
It absolutely does.
We hear people say all the time, I was doing so well, I was sober for months, and then I had a terrible day at work, the stress hit me, and I just couldn't stop myself from picking up a drink. And society often labels that moment as a character flaw or a profound lack of willpower.
But the data tells a very, very different story. That subjective feeling of I cannot shift gears when I'm stressed is not a lack of moral fortitude. It is a direct reflection of temporary but very real biological changes in the brain's circuitry.
It's a physiological roadblock.
Precisely. There is a physiological roadblock standing in the way of their willpower. The hardware required to make a different choice in that specific moment of stress is literally offline.
So if the underlying issue is a broken flexibility switch in the dorsal striatum, then simply telling someone to try harder is scientifically useless.
Worse than useless, it's counterproductive.
Right. So our interventions have to target the actual mechanism that is broken. What does that actually look like in practice? Like, how do we fix a rusted biological switch?
Well, it opens up three very distinct and promising therapeutic doors. First, on the pharmacological side, researchers are actively looking at medications that target this specific pathway.
Oh, like new drugs to fix the switch.
Exactly. If the problem is that the cholinergic interneurons aren't firing when the CRF hits them, pharmacology might offer a way to lower that activation threshold. There's ongoing research into things like CRF1 receptor antagonists or medications that might boost acetylcholine levels locally.
So essentially trying to resensitize those cells so they can actually respond to the stress signal again.
Exactly. Just greasing the gears.
Okay, so that addresses the chemistry, but we also know the brain is incredibly plastic, right? It responds to behavior. So how do behavioral therapies fit into this new model?
Behavioral therapies actually rebuild the physical wiring. If a person practices goal-directed decisions during simulated manageable stress, they are forcing those neural pathways to fire.
Basically working the muscle.
Right. And over time, through repeated action, neuroplasticity allows those synaptic connections to strengthen. The brain essentially learns how to lower the threshold of the interneurons manually.
Wow.
Yeah, therapy in this context isn't just about talking about your feelings, it's physical therapy for the dorsal striatum. You're repeatedly practicing the pivot motion until the rusted switch starts to move freely again.
That is so cool. Which brings us to the environmental aspect, which is something that I think gets heavily misunderstood in recovery circles.
Right.
Often people are sent to rehab facilities that are, quiet, isolated, and very low stress.
Right.
And sometimes people on the outside view that as an artificial bubble, saying things like, well, they have to face the real world eventually.
Yeah.
But based on this A Life study, providing a low stress environment in early sobriety isn't just about escaping temptation, it is a biological requirement.
That is a crucial distinction. The early withdrawal phase is precisely when these cholinergic interneurons are at their absolute most sluggish and unresponsive.
They're at their worst.
Exactly. So if you put a person back into a high-pressure environment immediately, the extended amygdala is going to flood the system with CRF. But because the interneurons can't respond yet, the person will inevitably default to the autopilot habit of drinking.
They have no other choice biologically.
Right. The brain literally requires a sustained period of low stress. It buys the nervous system time to clear all that biochemical interference, which allows those inner neurons to heal, reset their excitability thresholds, and regain their natural sensitivity to the stress signal.
It's about giving the navigation system time to reboot before you put the car back into rush hour traffic.
Beautifully said.
The incredible takeaway from Dr. Hazeltine's analysis is that these structural changes, while they are devastating in the short term, they are reversible. The damage alcohol does to this stress to flexibility circuit can be undone.
It's not permanent.
Right. It takes time, it takes an environment conducive to healing, and it takes an understanding of exactly what hardware is broken.
Because the difficulty of breaking an addiction, it makes perfect sense when you realize you are fighting a brain that has been temporarily blinded to its own manual override.
Yeah.
But knowing the blindness is temporary and knowing the exact biochemical mechanism causing it, it completely changes the conversation. It moves us away from stigma and blame and pushes us toward biology and targeted healing. Understanding the mechanics doesn't remove the hard work of recovery, but it ensures we are finally reading the correct map.
I love that trajectory, from stigma to biology and ultimately to targeted healing. Well, we have covered significant territory today. We explored how the extended amygdala and the BNST act as our early warning radar, flooding the system with the CRF stress signal. We learned how the dorsal striatum and its cholinergic interneurons serve as that critical manual override switch, utilizing acetylcholine to actually grant us behavioral flexibility. And most importantly, we broke down the exact mechanism of how alcohol withdrawal dampens that switch, locking us onto a dangerous autopilot. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Our mission is always to extract the most important insights from the research, helping you understand not just what we feel when we're under pressure, but the fascinating biological reasons why we feel it, and how our habits intersect with our neurobiology.
And if we connect this research to the bigger picture, we've seen how a substance like alcohol hijacks this intricate stress to flexibility circuit to lock in harmful patterns. But this raises a really important question for you to consider.
Oh, absolutely.
If stress fundamentally mutes our ability to pivot when our brain chemistry is compromised, what other non-substance habits in your daily life, from, say, doom scrolling on social media for hours to chronic procrastination, might be locked in by this exact same broken alarm system when you're under pressure?
That is absolutely a thought to chew on. The next time that internal alarm starts ringing and you instinctively reach out to turn down the volume, whether that is with a drink, a screen, or some other distraction, remember the manual override switch. Remember that the stress isn't just there to torment you. It is actively trying to give you the chemical fuel to pivot and make a new choice. Stay curious, keep exploring the incredible machinery inside your own head, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.